Hey guys, we've got some great stuff today for episode 3. This whole repricing of SaaS, or as a lot of the news outlets have been coining it, the SaaS apocalypse. But I think that's a little too much, right?
And I did an Angel Capital Association panel. We were talking about this just a few weeks ago. I mean, I think it's very much prescient on everyone's. It's on their front porch. It's on their front burner. Everyone's dealing with it.
Well, we have to remember, I mean, for the last 20 years, think about that, last 20 years, software has been built around a simple assumption. The more people use it, the more the product, means more seats. So the more revenue for the company, the more revenue, the more company value. That has completely shifted. Now, this isn't just, SaaS isn't just, something that we just humans use to become more productive. This is now replacing human workflows. And that's what's making this so interesting. So, this isn't the purpose of this conversation isn't that, hey, SaaS is dead. That's way too simplistic. The better question is, what kind of SaaS survives when AI changes who does the work, how work gets priced, and where value actually lives?
I think Gary, you touched upon that value piece. I mean, part of what let's go to the Wayback Machine. Before SaaS was called SaaS, there was the notion, the .com era, of application service providers. And the premise was that, the same SaaS premise we have today, the premise was that these application service providers can provide the application as a service, the software as a service, provide that at a cost lower than it would be for you to maintain, set it up, and do that yourself. That was the whole economic driver, that it would cost me way too much to build this CRM, way too much to maintain it. And recall back in, from the 70s and 80s and early 90s, everyone was basically writing their own corporate software, running it on their machines. That application service provider model, which then became the SaaS we all know and love, was really driven by the economics, that it was no longer cost effective for you to stand those things up yourself, that it was no longer effective to do that. And because that SaaS model also creates something that investors liked in terms of recurring capital, monthly recurring revenue, that like, hey, we can go every month, we know we're going to make X amount of dollars, we got X amount of clients. And that basically drove a couple of decades of investing in software and tech companies, because it was based upon those subscription pieces. And, prior to SaaS, leveling up what subscriptions meant, I mean, a subscription was something like Columbia House, where you're subscribing and you get a different album each month. That subscription services were derided, and SaaS basically elevated the subscription service like it was a totally normal thing. And that's where this economic model, as you allude to, Gary, has been with us for decades here, is now facing the first real pressure and change, because the notion of the drivers behind SaaS have been completely reshuffled.
Yeah. So we've been, so really what's happening right now is obviously just more of a valuation reshuffling when it comes to these companies. It's the ones who are going to be left behind are obviously the ones who are not aggressive enough to completely pivot from a product management perspective. What are your thoughts, Jesse?
Well, I want to kind of go back to when we talk about the value of SaaS, because one of the things that we always talk about is that with this new systems, the SaaS apocalypse is, but SaaS still has a great advantage over AI. And that is, in SaaS, when you are buying, how should I say this? When you're buying a seat, you're also buying the ability to experiment with no cost. Meaning, like, if I'm buying Adobe Photoshop and I'm buying into the Adobe system or Microsoft or whatever it is, I buy a seat, I can play around with that as much as I want. So I can go in there, I can learn, I can, do it. I can do a little bit, I can do a lot. But the ability to go and experiment and learn in that per seat system is really good. The catch-22 with AI is, especially as, these things become more expensive, is here's a technology where you desperately need to go in and experiment. But if the pricing is such that I'm paying for that experimentation. It's really expensive. And, for me to go in and mess around, it costs, a lot of tokens. So that's a detriment. So the per seat model still, I think, has an advantage because, you're not getting gigged for the experimentation of it. Do you know what I'm saying? So
Yeah.
that idea of the per seat model, now that'll change as we get into more hybrid ways of paying and stuff like this. But the idea that SaaS is dead, or that the idea of the per seat model is dead, at least for the time being, until AI figures out its pricing, and we're seeing that now with like tokens are costing more, they're throttling back on limits at a point where they desperately need people to get in there and try to play with these things. I mean, we all play with these things all day, but if you talk to, I hate to use the term normies, but if you go out there and talk to the general person, they're still kind of using this to polish letters and stuff. And what these frontier models desperately need is for people to look at them as a way to fundamentally do work. And if you're cutting all that off, early in the process, these people are never going to get it unless you're an enterprise system who's getting in there and paying for your employees to do it. But I don't know why enterprise would want to pay a lot of money to experiment or two. And you're seeing them pull back from that too as well. So I just wanted to say that before we go on.
Yeah. Kind of where my head's been really thinking, just thinking in the sense of where SaaS started and where it's going, is just kind of putting ourselves in the buyer's perspective. Just kind of like, imagining you're the CFO, and when a vendor comes in and says, and I'm sure this is happening left and right, is, hey, we added AI, so now your renewal costs go up X percentage, right? Some may not be clear about exactly, what exactly that value add could be. Something as simple as just like rewriting emails and things like that. But when you really think about it, what are you paying for as the buyer? You're obviously paying for outcomes. You're paying for positive impact. And what do you want to influence positive change as far as within your organization? Obviously, it's economically. Did this reduce labor? Did this increase throughput? Did it lower error rates? Did this reduce churn? Did this increase conversion? Did this shorten cycle time? Did this improve compliance? Did this lower support volume? Did this replace a workflow? I've been seeing like a lot of the obviously existing companies like your Microsofts of the world, is they'll still maintain their baseline SaaS pricing, but they'll add like a supplemental charge that are tied to outcomes, like very specific things. Like, for example, if it's like a CRM related type of platform, obviously it's to improve conversion and outcomes. If it's like you talked about like the Jira tickets, that's a huge one, just the speed of resolving a ticket, things like that. Those are all outcome related type of things that can be attributed towards cost. Because see, this is where it gets so tricky, is because now we have to tie in the economics of SaaS into even AI tokens and the whole token economics of AI as well. So it's no longer just like a fixed cost per se, even from the technology, partner who's providing that service and solution.
Agree that everyone's looking closely at those economics, but I think the challenge is there's a lot of low value SaaS out there. And a lot of organizations look at FinOps perspective that, why am I spending $30,000 a month on a system we can replace for 3 weeks worth of effort? And that kind of problem is very much out there. And I think you're seeing some feature creep. You're seeing the counterpoint. You're seeing everyone, Zendesk increasing their rates, Adobe increasing their rates. Hey, look, we've added AI features, but they're increasing the monthly per seat rates on this without delivering that value. It's not enough to have the feature point that AI is involved. And that's forcing organizations to take a really close look at this. There are SaaS solutions, for example, like Workday, which integrate HR and payroll and all those functions in one. That Workday has natural things that once you transition to Workday, it'd be really difficult for you just to leave Workday. You're not going to go build your own, payroll tax system on your own. But there are other systems where, if you're looking at that Zendesk seat, if you're not using those features and that blown features, you're closely evaluating what you're doing. And I think the aspiration that we have in this AI age is that maybe people pay more for the outcomes. But the challenge is that everybody is delivering those outcomes. And part of the pressure here, and there's something amidst this, and you have this with all the renewal periods going up, is that all these companies are being, the growth rate, they're still growing, but the growth rate is much more modest because, oddly enough, when you lay off tens of thousands of software developers in a month, those are tens of thousands of Jira seats that go away. Those are tens of thousands of Bitbucket seats go away. And that's reflected in the bottom line where they're acquiring customers, they're acquiring new customers, but the shrinking number of seats in these white collar roles, this focus on removing all these middle management roles, all those people had Jira seats. All those people had these other seats in the org that it creates there's a macroeconomic pressure that's going on simultaneously along with the, as you point out, those value ambitions that, hey, if we can demonstrate we're doing more, they'll pay more per seat. It's being tugged the other direction by reduced demand for some of these seats.
You bring up a really good point, is that we're talking about SaaS as if it's this monolithic entity. It's really not, because there are several different types of SaaS. The SaaS where like it's just a tool, AI can replace that pretty easy. If it's a dashboard or a wrapper or something like that, that's easy. System AI, things like CRMs, stuff like this, AI can use those, and there's a case to be made for those. And then there's like those, I guess, those like infrastructure SaaS models, like things like security, permissions, workflow, all those things that AI will actually use to get the work done. So there are different kinds of SaaS, and there's a case to be made that some of these simple programs where we pay every month are just done. They're just kind of out the window.
Yeah. And just kind of going back to that topic that you just touched on, labor compression, and as well as obviously license seats, that goes down as well. It all comes hand in hand. Just to kind of frame it for the audience who are not as technical or understanding of the of the SaaS and tech world, just think of it as the old world, right? Before AI, you have say a customer support operation, right? You've got about 1,000 support agents, 1,000 help desk seats, priced tied to humans, right, per seat. But now, after AI, you've got, for example, 300 support agents. AI resolves routine issues. Humans handle the edge cases. Customer volume increases because you can handle more volume. Um, and resolution time improves, obviously, thanks to AI. Software value increases, and the seat count falls. And that's obviously the paradox. The software may be more valuable than ever, but the old pricing meter captures less of that value.
No.
Isn't that where we want to be? Think about it. The idea that you just pay for a block, of a person who may or may not be doing work. In a perfect world, I would love to pay for the work that got done. Do you know what I'm saying? How do we make that fair, and how we don't get gouged? If you're enterprise, we would love that. It's the same way with in software development between fixed bid and paying by hour. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's, the client would love to do a fixed bid, but sometimes that's not fair to the developer. And so, trying to get to that point, and I'm taking the economics of replacing labor and stuff out of it, but just from the consumer's point of view, I would always want to pay for the quality of work. Okay, the work is one thing. I would really like to pay for the outcomes. That's what I would really like to pay for. And if I'm not getting outcomes, I don't want to pay for that. But under the current system, I'm paying regardless. Look at Salesforce. Salesforce is a perfect example of like, you're literally paying for everything. You're paying for seats, you're paying for this, you're paying for that. So you see them right now trying to turn this around. They're charging a per seat fee, but then they're also charging like a credit packages. By the way, the idea of using the term token, I think we're going to get away from that. It'll be credits, because no one understands what a token is. Correct. You know what I mean? So the idea of credits, people understand that. So I think you're going to see packages where it's a cheaper per seat, but you're going to get, credit packages to do other stuff. It'll be the Live Nation-ification of, your seat calls this, but if you want to get in early, if you want parking, if you want to do all these things, if you want to do all this work, you're going to have to buy credits for it. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No. There's historic precedence for this. Back when, in the pre-web application era, that when you had to access a database, every person who was accessing that database had to have a license. So Oracle would sell you a license to do that. And then what happened to web applications is suddenly the applications, you'd have these websites up and running, and they were using 2 database seats because the old pricing model didn't fit anymore. And we're hitting some of that now that, okay,
Mhm.
I only have 3 employees in the company, but I've got 4 dozen agents that we run constantly that need this. And the meaning of what a seat is anymore actually changes. And I think part
Mhm.
of that shift you're seeing is I'm starting to see startups that are stepping away from that seat and subscription model. As I mentioned earlier, that's been the de facto, that they're getting to something else. And it's getting back to this, the old way back when in the machine where you're paying for machine time and you had credits for machine time. I think there are aspects of that that are re-entering the lexicon. And this is part of the reason why SaaS valuations have fallen to the floor,
Mhm.
because everyone understands that we are in a very strange transition period here. So, you had a SaaS company a few years ago, you might see a 10 to 20x valuation based on revenue. There are SaaS exits now with 1x on revenue, being basically like a services company. And 1 to 3 is entirely typical right now because that long game is so cloudy. The way everyone is modeling this on these hockey stick growth curves, all that's cast into doubt when you have pressures that will change the pricing model. I mean, SaaS itself may not die in this process, but the existing licensing approach is probably going to be dramatically disrupted for the reasons we've all brought up.
Gary, you and I have talked about this in the past about, you know, agents, say you're an employee and you've got, agents out there doing work for you, and each agent is the equivalent of an employee. You know, how do you price that? What are your thoughts on that? I mean, as far as like, how do you do this in such a way? How do you, first of all, take the pricing out of it? How do you even organize this in such a way? Because if you have agents, you could have one agent, 10 agents, 100 agents. It's not like an employee where you have to onboard them and then like, hey, I'm going to hire 10 employees. You can have an infinite number of agents. So planning out the work that you need to do, what are your thoughts on like how do you even organize that from an
Yeah.
enterprise position?
And it's hard to just put one thought on it because there's so many different use case scenarios depending on the industry too. Because if you're tying it into outcomes, business outcomes, and you're, equating it to economic value for that organization, it's not a one size fit all for every single industry. So you're going to have different pricing models, and we talked about it. You mentioned, you could see how this won't be framed around tokens per se, because that can be a little confusing for the rest of the world, but more like a credit based, usage based. But I've been seeing a lot of that hybrid model. What I mean by like
Yeah.
the seat plus the
See
outcome based,
credits.
because obviously not everyone's going to they're still making that transition still, people who are still used to the old interfaces and some of the old SaaS platforms, so they're still paying for that baseline, seat pricing. So now they're just adding on, paying for that additional piece that are more related towards outcomes. So like, kind of just to throw some examples out there, right? Like Salesforce, their agent force, right? Like they're trying to protect and expand value by moving beyond traditional seats into agent actions, conversations, credits, and workflow based value. This basically supports the idea that, companies are not abandoning SaaS pricing overnight. They are layering in they are layering in new meters on top of the old models. Like, Microsoft Copilot, same thing. They're defending their seat model with Copilot add-ons, right? But also toward credits and agents through Copilot Studio. Um, Stripe, another big example, right? This is an infrastructure example. If AI companies need usage, token, credit, outcome subscription, and hybrid billing, then the billing layer becomes more strategic. Stripe is not just selling payments, it's the entire infrastructure behind payments.
I think there's a hazard though, and this is the SaaS creep that we have going on right now, is that we're all paying for seats. We pay for seats for the Futurmatic, Google Workspace
Mm-hmm.
instance and all those pieces, is that we're paying for prompts umpteen times over. The reality is that I'm not looking for every provider that I'm using to provide AI. I want connectivity so I can plug our organization's intelligence into their stuff. I don't want to pay for yet another half-ass integrated prompt mechanism in their platforms. And I think that's the misguided part of the product strategy here. And everyone's doing bolt-on. That's the last thing I want. I treat mail as one utility. The AI is another utility I pay for. I do not want everything all in one shot. And the reality is these solutions, when they bake that in, we just went through this with Google, where Google has Google I/O this week and rolling pieces in. That's all great if you're in that world, but even in Google Workspace still today, despite the announcement, I can't use a Gemini prompt in Google Docs to tell me what's going on in Gemini. That
Yeah. Oh,
my
so bad.
our OpenAI private instance is better informed because it connects those systems. I think that's the part where I think the greed of being able to increase your per seats because you're losing seats elsewhere. The greed of being able to go and dramatically increase that per seat pricing. That somehow Adobe's cloud package has gone from $49 a month to over $100 a
Yep.
month in
Yeah.
just a year. And the reality is, for my use of those tools, and I use them, that I'm not using it any differently than I did before, and I'm paying twice as much. And I don't know that that's a sustainable model, and increases pressures for people to say, hey, maybe I don't need this.
That you said some perfect. Do we need better models? Yeah, probably. Do I need the stuff that I already have to work well with everything else? Absolutely. Like it's amazing to me that my chat GPT often works better with my Google Drive than my Gemini does.
Yes.
That's insane to me. You know what I mean? And by the way, like Google doesn't seem to they seem to keep doing the same thing they've done for years. Like I was just looking at all the new stuff that they're offering, and some of it's cool, but it's a million different things that I know half of them will be gone in 6 months. So I don't want to get too emotionally involved in any of them. You know what I mean? Because I know it's just going to be gone. You know what I mean? It's like how many messaging apps that we have from Google? How many, AI things have we had? So I don't want to ever get too involved. I would just love for this stuff to work together better because most people, the what chat or Gemini or Claude does is pretty good for where people are at now. I mean, maybe for the future it won't be. They just need it to work. Like, I had people all the time are asking me like, okay, well, how do I keep track of this? And how do I send it? Like it's, and I think you're trying to see this, Google's trying to do this with their Omni. They're trying to make it, hey, there's not 50 different things, just one thing. You just ask it and it'll do everything in one window.
Yeah.
But, for a lot of people, I think the idea of all these different things working together would be a welcome endeavor.
It's what you need to really get that value. I mean, Gary and I just had this conversation on the Futurmatic client earlier in the week where they were sharing existing systems. And Gary and I are looking at it from a business process perspective.
Mhm.
Where's the data and can I get to it? And we were delighted to run and says, oh, that's full. That's got a full MCP server capability. We can tie that right in. Do we have to write MCP servers and stand them up? We'll do that. But I think it is that integration. And we talk about this, post software and post application world. I was watching a general cable news program yesterday, and they were talking about the end of apps. The host was talking about the end of apps.
Mhm.
And AI will do everything. You'll be your one app for everything. Basically, the world that China was living in with WeChat will be our world here, but the one app connected to everything, and that's where it's going. But to do that and to do that in the enterprise, you really have to be able to link together these systems. I was on a conversation with a C-suite exec earlier in the week that they said, I don't care about XYZ service we're paying for that. They need to give me my data or I'm leaving. I need to have access to the data.
Mhm.
I'll pay you. I'll continue to pay monthly a seat. But if you're going to make it hard for me to access the data to facilitate that integration that Jesse's talking about, they will seek out another SaaS platform. They're okay with paying the SaaS seat if they can get access to their data.
But I want to push back on that argument that there'll be one or there'll be one thing to rule them all, because I think that's great for agents because agents don't need
Yes.
all these things. We as humans, however, I think we need a delineation between things that do one thing and things that do another.
I agree.
There's a commonality.
Yeah.
Listen, we all have seen the memes about using Microsoft Teams or things like this, but there's a reason. It's because there's a culture around certain applications that they're partitioned so that they do one
Yes.
thing. If you have an application that does everything, there's no commonality because I will use it in a nebulous way that is slightly different than the way someone else will. We won't have the commonality as people to be able to talk about things in a way where we understand one another because we don't have a commonality we need, even if it's artificial, I think we need some of those partitions, whether it's, hey, I know how a tonal curve works in Lightroom. If you get rid of that and you just start describing in different terms, there's no commonality to it. So I think that even if we do get to the point where there's one software to rule it all, we will create artificial partitions to do certain types of work. People will break off. Photographers will break off and have their lexicon. CPAs will have their lexicon the way they do now. Whether or not that takes the form of separate forms of SaaS programming or something, or just a commonality, we will create that even if it's not there. Even if we got rid of that overnight, people would find a way to partition, and because our minds can't wrap ourselves around something that is nebulous and doesn't have a form but just does what we want it to do, we want to try to put some type of order to it.
Feel 100%. That's an amazing insight, Jesse. I agree, because
Yeah.
there's one thing that I do with this, which is odd, is I do my personal AI use stuff like in my own personal life. I do it with completely separate context, completely separate count with all the professional pieces. Because it doesn't need to know that I was trying to find out when the new Charlie XCX album is coming out. Nothing else there's no need for that kind of thing. And we're looking up as we're watching, wife and I watching TV for the second screen piece, that AI, I don't need that commingle. I don't need to have my professional AI context to understand that. I know there's some people like having everything in one. I like the complete separation of what I'm doing personally and what I'm doing in my business
I
adventures.
don't like my mashed potatoes to touch my peas.
100%. The textures are all wrong.
Exactly.
100%.
Well, so
Yeah.
here's a question for both of you. We're men of a certain age. Is this a result of the fact that we are just coming from that world where everything is separate and we're just, will people in the future, will this not be a hang up for them? Or do you feel like as human beings, we are going to need some type of delineation? Our kids, will they, or our grandkids, will this just be natural to them to have one app that rules it all? Or do you think that they will need some type of partitioning, of their different workflows and things like that?
Barry, I'll let you go first.
I know we're getting
Yeah,
off topic here a little bit.
Jesse, one thing that keeps ringing back to me is when you had said in one of the podcast episodes about, actually our last one, about how important tactile feedback is.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know, man. Like, I'm all about automation. I'm sure we're all about automation, right? Convenience is always the biggest seller of technology. But like, even if, say, for example, you were using AI or a software system to accomplish one, something as simple as, I don't know, I'm looking for a trail to hike, right, with these specific parameters, things like that. I sometimes feel like during that journey, that prompting journey, right, even though at the end of the day, you still want that like very end outcome of like, all right, these are the shows. I feel like through that user experience of even prompting, there's still some layers in between that I prefer something outside of the text, obviously, right? And it can't go all the way 100% to the very end. Because kind of what I'm trying to say is like, it's going to be a transition. So yeah, younger people who are more used to it and accepting from a confidence level, meaning like, all right, this system works and whatever. Versus like, I guess I'm just trying to think through like, because we're so used to the older method, we kind of want to see what's happening in between to kind of validate that's working. See what I'm saying? Like that tactile piece. I feel like that's going to take time to eventually wane away from the user experience perspective.
Yeah, I think there's definitely there's going to be generational differences how it's used. I mean, John, Jesse, and I've talked about this with young people and old digital cameras. which is kind of
Yeah.
interesting. There is
Yeah.
a desire for that separation. There's also a much greater emphasis with Gen Z and Gen Alpha on work-life balance, where Gen X was very much work-life integration, latchkey kids, et cetera, different mindset. But I think that does result in some separation. I think some separation. The difference is that you're having a generation come up right now, the folks who are in school, people who are in school. I mean, we went through academic experiences with, I know myself and Jesse, internet was barely a thing. I mean, Netscape Navigator landed while we were like junior, senior year in college.
CompuServe. I remember CompuServe.
CompuServe and Prodigy and those, Prodigy, which is like the Kmart of access. I think Sears technically had a stake in one of those.
Wow.
But that kind of that model was very different back then. We didn't have that, and the notion all these folks go through laptops. I think you saw that with those students who are actually booing the speaker, the commencement speaker, for talking about AI. I think that there is a feeling of vibes. If you're transitioning into workforce right now, you're feeling this as a young person graduate. If you've been in high school and going through that, you've already integrated AI in how you do everything. And that, I think, is something that, generationally, it's interesting to watch transition. I mean, I'm not in the rocking on the chair of the porch until I go to get off my lawn stage yet, but watching how, I think it's going to be instructive how that generation adopts it. And for that Google Omni play, Google's clearly pushing this idea that not just beyond search is that Gemini Omni will be what Google search was for the past 26 years.
You know why I love talking to you guys is because we do this, by the way, even off the podcast. I think the three of us and is that we just kind of go off on these tangents because the possibilities. It's the first time in a long time in debt we've talked about this that there's something new.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? That the possibilities, because as you get older, things take a lot more to impress you. So this is the first time in a long time where I'm like, wow, the possibilities of this. I do want to get back to something, Gary, I know this has been a big focus of you is pricing based off outcomes.
Yeah.
And one of the things that's hard with that is what is an outcome? You know what I mean? Because outcome pricing is easy to, and you can admire it all you want, but how do you measure that? Because there are certain, for example, if you're a company that does, say you're a call center, and at the end of the call center, somebody does, a little survey says, yes, I was happy for that. It's easy to measure an outcome for that, but how do you measure like an economic outcome? How do you measure that this software is giving you a value that is worth? Because you as the consumer, you're always going to be like, well, I want more, like for my money. So how is that?
Yeah.
How do we measure outcomes in a way that's fair to the pricing for these models, but is also reflective of the work it's actually doing for you? Because again, there's units of work and then there's positive outcomes. They're not necessarily the same thing. How do we measure that? And how are we going to, incorporate that in the future?
Well, the quick answer is it has to be around measurable workflows, right? In the sense, if you want it to be outcome based, like kind of one example that keeps ringing in my mind is Klarna, right? Very simple one. It's a labor compression example. 2.3 million conversions in 1 month was the result, and the equal work of about 700 full-time agents. So 2/3, it basically cut out 2/3 of their support requirements from the human capital level, and the resolution time dropped from 11 minutes to under 2 minutes, and their expected yield is 40 million in profit improvement. So that's just a quick labor cut, right? But those are examples of like very specific workflows, like customer support, like support tickets, claims processing, lead resolutions, right? And of course in sales, the lead qualification, better qualifying it, things that, for example, Salesforce is doing.
Yeah, but how do you measure the quality? So say you have a lead how do you measure the quality of it? Is it just because was able to convert it and therefore that's a higher quality
Yeah.
lead? I mean, like I can see where you're saying like the outcomes were things that are very definitive. How like things that are a little bit more nebulous or a little bit more gossamer, how do we do that? Debt?
I think that the challenge with that is that, and you saw this with the Cloudflare letter, LTE that the CEO of Cloudflare wrote, where they got rid of the people that were measuring stuff. They laid off a massive number of
Yeah.
employees, despite the high profits and everything else. And I think one of the real challenges is that part of being, the management side in the world we live in is really understanding what those KPIs are. And the challenge is that, very frankly, going through a lot of different works, people aren't very good at that. And when you go and you ask through, I've been in roles where we could do anything we wanted to if we had an ROI to do it, which is very much relevant to our SaaS discussion. Do we have an ROI for this? Doesn't make sense. What is the ROI for that? And the problem is that the ROI is not simply a dollar-based outcome. There are software impacts to that. There's customer pieces and such. And those things require a level of imagination that is different than what a lot of people bring to middle management roles. And that is why Cloudflare, they just basically, they're going to let the AI define those pieces. And AI is pretty interesting because, it's finding those non-intuitive significant pieces. But I think if you really want to know how something's working and doing that, you have to be really creative to what those really KPIs are. Are we measuring this and knowing that it's working? It's not worth really doing as a company. Can we measure that it has an impact? And if you look at the IT spend, if you look at the spend in IT over the past decade, so much of it was, well, because everybody else is doing that, we got to do that too. I need to have this function in my org chart because
Yeah. Yeah.
an organization our size has to have the function. And why on earth are you paying a DevOps person $300,000 an hour if you figured out what the ROI actually would be for that kind of function? I think there's a reality, and this is what's happening in IT right now, is IT is hitting the reality that those KPIs are super duper important. The impact that they have on their return investment, the massive investments made in these areas. I mean, in the end, it was always this, should IT be a cost center or should it be something else? And I think a lot of orgs, because when they poorly define the KPIs, oh, it's a cost center. It says there shouldn't be a part of the company where you just set fire to money. And that, historically has been a problem. So in this AI age, as we now look at our FinOps piece, we look at SaaS, we look at cost pieces, is that it really is refreshing how we look at that. And that's one of the most disruptive changes is that I have had more software ROI conversations in the past 2 years than I heard in the prior 8. And that's something that is really, I think, fundamentally important, a driver underpinning all of this.
So, debt, going a little bit further in this, and to Gary too, it seems like there are two things that are working against one another. If you're an enterprise and you want to pay for outcomes, you want to pay for the quality of work, the ROIs, the value that it adds to your company. But the AI is not priced. The AI wants to price for usage, for compute. So there's actually a disconnect between that because if I'm a company, I want to pay for the least amount of compute to get the best possible
Yes.
outcome. So if that's the case, is there a whole industry that is going to be revolve around, for lack of a better term, credit hygiene? Meaning, how do I get the best possible? Hey, listen, you're going to use this model for this, but you're going to use a thinking model for this. A whole industry around, hey, this is going to get every bit of every part of the buffalo, so to speak,
Yes.
out of the least amount of credits, that you use. How is that going to be a part of the equation as well?
Yeah, agreed. And not everything needs the pro model, ultra model, or thinking model. And you see a lot of that when we're going in these orgs that have already built some AI and they're wondering why it's costing them $8,000 a month or more to run this piece. So like you're doing something using the thinking or pro model, that'd be perfectly fine using the flash or instant or fast model. I think understanding and picking that is part of the science here, and the AI will actually, whether using Claude, whether using Gemini, whether using OpenAI, you can actually ask it, which model should I really be using for this? But so few people bother to do that and just paying for that utilization. And just like you would if you have a Zendesk subscription, do I need all these features? Do I need that? And, folks will go, oh, I'll just go the maximum per seat so I won't forget anything. And the aggregate cost of that, it's like you're ruining that ROI equation when you're not considering those things.
Yeah, but most people won't, because the way we've told people to use AI is just talk to it. And so most people will not use, at least I don't believe, most people will not use a strategy. Like I will ask ChatGPT to write the prompts for Gemini. You know what I
Yeah,
mean? I'm
yeah.
like, you know what I mean? And so most people, what we've told them to do is like, just talk to it like a human. And if you're like anybody that I know, they'll just keep droning on and on and on, probably more than they should. But, that idea that, um, how do you do it? And by the way, this goes back to Gary. Remember, I think it was the last podcast you and I were talking about, okay, this is such a democratizing, everybody has pretty much access to the same things that everybody else has within reason. If I'm an enterprise, am I going to restrict the models that certain people in my enterprise have and reserve certain models for the heavy hitters, the heavy users, things like this? Or think about it from the enterprise, from the frontier models point of view. Am I going to reserve the best models for the big level clients for 6 months and hold them back, and then it'll filter down, the way it does now, where you get, your fast model is, is a lower model. To have access to the real frontier models, am I going to have to be someone who pays, an exorbitant amount of money, and then it's less money for a consumer or no money for a consumer? It's free, and we're that's how we're funding this, and then it becomes less, democratized, among enterprises.
Seeing evidence of that happening now.
Mhm.
And even amongst these scrappier orgs that have less budget for these things and what they're paying, what's driving it, is that I'm seeing evidence of this happening now. And, I think it's going to be looked at because the problem is, and I had this thing, I was listening to Angel Gambino speak a few weeks ago, and she mentioned that, AI is not an edge, it's a subscription. And then she threw out, I have all the premium subscriptions. So let's say you're on your free tier of ChatGPT and you're looking for a job and you're having ChatGPT help you with your resume for that job versus someone who has more money, can afford the premium pieces. They're getting a better resume as a
Yep.
result.
Yep.
That the democratization here, I'm always hesitant to call it democratization because we are diluting the value of a lot of work. Basically, we are basically making a lot of these things used to be hard or very easy, but there's very clearly already emerging different tiers of what's happening out there. And like these young startups say, hey, we got this brilliant idea, we're doing this. We got $100 million, and they can't get the compute to train the models that they're doing for that $100 million. And I
Yeah.
think that is something that is interesting because, we talk about the amazing abundance thing, which I always go to
Yeah.
the Mad Max thing because it's a trope where, there's an abundance for all, in terms of water and what have you. But there is an aspect to this where, you know, this isn't really reshuffling the deck, I think, as people would think. It's not necessarily enabling that person who's just at home, who didn't have a job, but figured his way out of the basement to turn into a billion-dollar company next week. There is already emerging a stratification here on who has access to compute resources, what level subscriptions you can afford, and you might lose your job to someone whose resume was also written with ChatGPT, but was written with the high tier of ChatGPT versus your freely available version.
Yeah. By the way, I am
Yeah.
of firm opinion that if you want to teach people the economy of using compute, everybody should have a Qualbot at some point, because nothing will teach you the economics of compute. And when you don't you set too many wake ups in the middle of the night, you wake up with $100 worth of tokens just gone for nothing. Everybody should run a claw bot just for the suddenly you'd be like, oh, I'm going to use this really judiciously. Because that is a skill I think you might have to learn.
I saw one of the litany of AI YouTuber folks that they're plugging a different tool each week and whatnot. And he had posted an apology video because his approach spent $800 in one night. He had not realized this after the fact.
Yeah.
It was waking up every minute or so. It was like, yeah.
But it goes back, I mean, there's a real core here that the SaaS apocalypse narrative is really something that's oversimplified. I mean, we have this real transition, we have a change, we have all these headless users that are out there, is that it really is something that is, it's not one thing. It leverages different tools, different pieces. There are tools that are going to be more valuable and live through the SaaS apocalypse. And there's things, these low value SaaS solutions that people are paying for, or SaaS solutions that get greedy, are going to find themselves on the outs. And on top of that, if your SaaS users are white collar workers and middle management, you're going to have to really think about your forecasting, because we're seeing that serious disruptive change right now.
Yeah. By the way, the other thing with SaaS too is that we haven't talked about is these are not things that are just, hey, look, we could replace them with AI overnight. A lot of these SaaS, it's not just the platforms and things that they've come up with. It's a lot of this institutional knowledge that is not part of any model. So if you're Salesforce or Adobe or something, you can make a case that there's a lot of institutional knowledge. Like, yeah, you could recreate the tools, but the flow and how people use them and things like this, if you're just recreating that, you're just recreating what Adobe does. There's a lot of that institutional data, knowledge, all this stuff that they've collected over the years that is not part of a model that, gives them worth, out in the market. So, it's not just, hey, I can create the exact same thing. Yeah, you could, but Adobe kept improving that every year. They kept, they used their institutional knowledge to know what people want.
People underestimate that stickiness.
Yeah.
That stickiness gets
it.
underestimated, but I think so much of it's driven by the apocalypse framing, is driven by this anxiety that this used to be a much more predictable space and used to be a much more predictable revenue stream. And that you have to make changes now, that you're not going to run the next 10 years doing per seat licenses with 18% increases every year.
Yep.
And that really goes to what things Gary and I have been talking about as well.
The 18% increases will just be with the models.
Yeah, exactly.
We talked about all this abundance talk and everything. I think you just mentioned that earlier, Det. But it is kind of ironic that we live in an era where AI makes software value more measurable, but the spend less predictable.
Yes. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's that trend line. I mean, that's the thing. And now, people were having conversations. They were probably perfectly fine doing their Zendesk renewal every year and having the price go up and up and up. But now they're asking the question, and now they're going and searching that and doing the comparison pieces. They're having their agents go out there and get other quotes. It's very disruptive to be able to measure some of these things now that you weren't able to measure before.
Yeah, which brings a very important topic that we should discuss, is basically the whole concept behind AI puffery, for lack of a better word, versus real value. And where I really want to touch upon this is because, for our less technical audience, especially, all three of us here have lived through the .com boom and bust, and just like any hype cycle, I don't want to call this a hype cycle, but any very exciting time, you have everybody trying to follow that path. So I remember, like, when the .com boom popped up, overnight almost everybody was a web designer. AI came out overnight. Everybody's an AI company, so what in your minds, and let me frame this, separates what that AI puffery is, and how do we frame it for our audience to better understand? So when they hear about all these services being what what should they actually be paying attention to? Like, for example, your typical vendor situation would be like, some of your very basic AI fluffery would be like AI summary of meetings, your generic chat bots, very minimal workflow integration, um, you know, and all they do is throw on a 20% or a 30% price increase versus like the vendors who are really bringing value, they're showing measurable, workflow outcome improvements, lower resolution time, fewer escalations, and showing clear paths towards automation and time savings, you know, money saved per resolved issue, things like that. Love to hear your thoughts, guys, on what do you see as the real stuff out there and what's not.
Your business is always what your business is.
Yeah, yeah.
And we saw this all the time. How many times would we go in and, for example, when we do a lot of virtual and augmented reality work. And I can't tell you how many times you go in and somebody would want to do something just because of the VR and AR of it, not because it was an actual solution. If you were an enterprise and you make widgets, your business is widgets. It's not AI. The AI is always there to solve the backlog of problems and hopefully the infinite backlog of things. And by that, I mean, the backlog is the stuff that I've got every day that I can't get to, or I need to do better, or I need to do this more economically. AI helps you with that. The infinite backlog is all those things that you will put aside permanently because we don't have the money, or we're just not smart enough, or the technology's not there, and we'll probably never get to it. AI is making that infinite backlog suddenly possible. So if you're an enterprise and AI is helping you solve your backlog and possibly allow you to address for the first time the infinite backlog, that is what you want to use it for. You don't want to just be, hey, I need AI because I need my customers to respect that I've got an AI thing going on. We've seen this with every single technology. Stay true to your vision, stay true to what you're doing as a company. Use AI to solve problems, but you are not an AI company. You're not, what's the shoe company that else an AI company? What is the shoe company? The famous,
Oh,
what's, you know what I'm talking.
Allbirds.
Allbirds is an AI
Yeah,
company
yeah.
now. They don't make shoes anymore. Like, how is
Yeah.
that possible?
But
You know?
I think Jesse, really, part of that whole focus is that of the many technological disruptions we had. I kind of, for the examples that, you know, I'm writing a novel and I'm using Microsoft Word. Like I got my mind set to Microsoft Word. I'm not focusing on the plot elements, not focusing on the narrative.
Yep.
I'm going to use Microsoft Word and do that. Is that there's an aspect to AI where we've seen AI most successfully integrated. It's not being driven by the IT department. It's being driven by the people who have these very
Yeah.
specific problems and such. And if anything, it's that success, success is coming from the folks who actually need to solve the problems and being closer, having close to the problems and not having so much of an IT layer there. I mean, that's where we've been successful in the Futurmatic front. That's where, we see the greatest opportunity is that you really have to think about it differently. And so much of this, whether like I need a website, I need a mobile app, I need AI. That is not the question. You need a website to sell product, engage customers. What are you trying to do? Why do you need a mobile app? Why do you need VR for this? Why? And in the end, I think it's really important for us, especially that, straddle the business and technology line, is to really, keep the focus on what this actually needs to do to get done. What can I improve? Can I take an estimating process that takes you a week now and have you get it done in a couple of minutes? Can we do things that really come down to some, the kinds of things where a business consultant would come in and say, hey, you do this, everything's better, and then give you no way to execute it. And you find out it takes $25 million to make those changes. There's a great joke in engineering school, where a physicist comes in, tells a poultry company how they need to do all their processing, do all this thing, good thing, gives all this information. But the physicist opens up with, before we get into any of that, you must assume a spherical chicken. And the spherical chicken joke, that or the rest of the theory only makes sense there. I think the opportunity that exists here is that what would be, if we had a system that could go and read through all of the quotes and validate them, that would be great. But we're now in a situation where a lot of those things that were not cost effective to realize are realizable. And that is a fundamental shift where, someone could come in and say, oh, you do all these things, you'll spend $30 million and get X amount of ROI. That's kind of that's not real. And the time that, used to do that old kind of consulting guidance work, in that time, we literally could stand up solution. And, Gary and I were going through something, and a prior vendor had quoted the company 50 grand 4 years ago to build the thing. They didn't want to build it then. Gary and I, in a couple of hours, stood this up. And I think it took longer to write the email than it took to deploy it. But that kind of change, when we talk about the underlying SaaS pieces, talk about the puffery and everything else, there's some real impact here beyond the puffery. And it's not just adding an AI feature label to your existing product. It's about fundamentally changing how you leverage technology and products in your company.
And by the way, we'll go through it. We'll see a million different, we saw it with every other thing. We'll see little snake oil salesman, AI solutions, those stuff. It's just, you have to go through it. I mean, it's just, you'd love to be able to, get through this and get to the real work and stuff like this, but
Yeah.
it's almost just something like people have to get it out of their systems, so you'll see all this kind of, like I said, snake oil salesman kind of like, AI will do this. You see it all the time. Like, hey, here's 6 prompts, on LinkedIn. Here's
Yeah.
6 prompts to write a better resume, or here's
Yeah.
6 prompts to do this. Like,
6
it's
prompts to change your life. I mean, but there is
yes,
that.
yeah.
But they have this also with the internet, with the website development companies we saw, and the many SEO companies and things. Just people to hop on the bandwagon. I think part of that is that it's people do go say, hey, they think that's the hot space, and you see like the shoe company that became an AI company, that suddenly they can get investment. They're not getting investment based upon shoes or doing that. But I think when you look at investment capital, you look at people are looking at, you look at these SaaS models. I mean, it all really comes back around to the core economics of this thing. Is it economical to build? Should I be paying someone else to do this service? Does this even make sense to do here in 2026? Am I doing, should I just crack it open and revisit how I'm doing everything?
We've seen this since electricity. When
Yeah.
electricity first came out, remember all those quackery, like electrode things, stimulators, and all these kind of things. You put them on your temples with like,
Yeah.
it'll happen with AI. It'll happen whatever comes next. It's human nature to want to, and part of it is I don't think it's necessarily um ill will or any kind of mal intent. I think it's, people get excited about stuff, and, it's like, they invest emotionally in it. And so they wanted to do things that maybe it's not ready to do, or maybe that it will never be ready to do. But you'll see this, we saw it with VR, AR, you see it with, blockchain, remember everything blockchain was. So you'll see this with AI, and it'll run its course, and then you'll get to the real work. But there'll be a group of people that will take all the oxygen out of the room talking about all these crazy things. And then there'll be the people that you don't hear about, who are behind the scenes doing the work every single day.
And you probably won't be using AI to launch a new SaaS company or app. I mean, that's the thing that's interesting. I see a lot of these things. It's like, look, I built this in 2 weeks. We're going to go. We're going to charge people $99 a month. That, there's an underlying economic question here, which comes to the root of it, which we've all talked about extensively and talked about a lot today, is that the economics of what you're doing actually have to make sense. And when you lower the bar, what it takes, when someone sends me a nicely worded email, honestly doesn't have the same weight it used to, because, these are very coherent thoughts from person X. This is almost too coherent. It's too perfect. So when someone reads an email from me or text from me and it has a misspelling in it, it's intention, but it shows it was created by a human. Basically.
Then I'm lucky because I misspell everything.
It's a tell. Yeah. Basically,
Yeah, that's good for me now. Yeah.
It's an artisan email that was composed, an artisan statement versus the nice, coherent thoughts and ideas. I think there's value in that too, on top of all of this.
Yeah. Yeah. Which makes me want to double click on something you just mentioned just previously, Det, is just around how just developing things internally as a company, right? Around the topic around build versus buy, that whole concept is changing, obviously, right? Because AI has lowered the cost of building custom software, right? This obviously puts the pressure right back on SaaS vendors as well. Because, for years, SaaS won because, it's not cheap or fast to build your own CRM, your own help desk, your own billing system, and so forth, right? But AI completely has changed this equation. But and now when you have non-technical operators that can literally generate their own workflows, scripts, dashboards, automations, and internal applications with AI assistance, it's like the landscape has completely changed. So the biggest question is: so I'm medium to large size business, or even small business, any new company. What requirements or how should I evaluate? Should I just go ahead and just build this internally?
No.
Or does it make more sense for me just to purchase this external SaaS tool or whatever?
So yes, and there are times you can build your own things. But think about this: everyone has access to paints and brushes. How many Michelangelos do we have? You know what I'm saying? And now AI will level a lot of that out because it's the knowledge that it has and its ability to do things. But we say it all the time. How many times do you go into a client and you think the client has this grand vision and I'm going to struggle to facilitate it? It's usually the opposite. The client's like, I don't know what I want. I know I need this, but I don't know. What do you think? And suddenly we have to be the imagination for them. Thing that AI is not going to make people more imaginative. And
Yeah.
so, yes, you could probably build a solution that does a predefined thing, but anything that is inventive and innovative is going to take a human who is inventive and imaginative and innovative at its core to do something that is not derivative off everything else. So that human capital of imagination of the iconoclasts who do things differently, that's what's going to differentiate some of these solutions rather than not. And a lot of people just, we like to think that we're imaginative, but a lot of people aren't. And so you can come up with solutions that will do simple things, but if you're trying to create something that is groundbreaking and new, um, you, at least for the time being, you're going to need to be an equal partner with AI to get those things done.
I agree. I mean, I think there's not a simple answer for that because you really have to do the math for what you're
Yeah.
doing and sophistication of what you're doing, whether or not you have the competencies internally. I mean, part of the, we
Yeah,
talk with a lot of,
that's what we've emphasized so many times in all of our calls, podcasts, is how important it is for C-suite to really take a deeper dive into the economics of all of this. I mean, this is hard enough already for people like us in the industry because it's changing so much, like all the time.
yeah.
So to have a baseline understanding around this is so important.
And part of that too is the understanding is not just the building it is, you see, there's aspect of vibe coding that feels transitional because people are building systems, but then they don't understand that whole software, the SDLC, the whole lifecycle management, what happens after you deploy it. So it's one thing if you have a GPT or a Claude project that's serving a function in the business, there's no maintenance, there's nothing really to do, it just runs. But if I deploy a system on AWS and you build the system, play on AWS, I had 2 of these conversations this week where the system went gone because they had no one monitoring and managing it, the payment had expired. And, when you're looking at that you really have to look at your total cost, the total cost of it. So if you're doing a solution that's going to have to be deployed and maintained, who's managing it, who's keeping an eye on it, who's bird dogging it, and that all those inputs go into that decision. Dan, Gary, we talk about all the time. Like, you're thinking through all these points. That's the level of sophistication where you might get the quick answer from the AI on doing that. If you're trying to do self-guided, but you have to be prepared to ask those right questions and have that full vision of what it takes to keep it around and alive.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's take a little bit of a different direction with this next topic. And this is a short one we can visit on. It's you mentioned this recently, Jesse, the headless software. So the conversation around SaaS has been centered around the human, all right, and seat licensing for the human as the operator. We haven't even talked much about the agent as the operator, the headless software for SaaS, because your next power user might be an API call as a SaaS company.
It's kind of sad because, a lot of the personality that, just from speaking from a user standpoint, a lot of personality is in the way that these different SaaS models we talked about earlier, the delineation between, how people work and our attachment to certain, software. But when it's just all working behind the scenes, it's hard to have an affinity for things, but we won't need to because, it's agents that will be doing the work. So, if you have an agent behind the scene who's using that, there won't be an interface or anything to,
Yeah.
to, you know,
Well, so on the interface topic you just said, Jesse, that's why we have to now what's changed is like we have to understand that the UI used to be the moat, right? The interface, right? Now the workflow is the moat. And if AI is the user, call it the agents, then the UX is going to look entirely different.
yeah, yeah.
How they communicate.
I mean, I think that's also with on MCP. I mean, MCP is glorious because it's human readable, it's understandable, but the expectations are different. And I think, everyone's looking for a moat here whether they're a SaaS company, whether you're developing a product in pieces. And your moat needs to be something that, someone can't just look at it. It's got to be, I think, data and workflow are key. Um, Workflow is less a moat because it can often be very proprietary, but having that underlying information and workflow to drive things is far more important than what it looks like. And we all worked with amazing UI/UX designers over the years. If you've got a bunch of headless systems there, that's a different kind of value and role is there as well. But I think that you know it's not what it looks like in the old days. Hey, just give me a bunch of graphs and make it pretty. We created all these web dashboards for years that now that the needs are very different for how that data is consumed.
Also, it's harder for the average consumer to really know what software is doing what. Do you know what I mean? So, like, if I sign into Salesforce or Adobe or whatever it is, I know that Salesforce does this. I know Adobe Photoshop does this. I'm literally engaging with it. If it's all happening behind the scenes, it's like a lot of software that happens behind the scenes, security software, out of sight, out of mind. You know what I mean? It's there, but I have no real affinity or attachment to it. Not that you have to, but you know what I mean? So you're not going to have, you know, thousands of people showing up for Adobe conferences. You know what I
No,
mean? It's like, they become very different companies personality wise if all the work is happening behind the scenes.
Yeah. Hey, I forgot to mention this topic. I've always been mentioning this and I want to see what you guys think about this. You've heard me mention this in the past, ever since this whole SaaS apocalypse, narrative started beginning, is I've used the analogy of like, think of it as like the Amazon market space, or yeah, the Amazon market space where you have your third party vendors that obviously sell on Amazon, and Amazon obviously seeing all the market data for what's successful as far as products, they can make an assessment on whether or not they want to make a Amazon Basics version of that. So they'll just go right in and just undercut one of their vendors, so thereby cannibalizing, essentially, their own partners. That's obviously happening to an extent, maybe even at a very aggressive rate with all these large AI companies too, right? As we see, I mean, remember during the early days, when agent workflows were first starting to get built, the tools to build, agent workflows like your N8N, stuff like that, just like overnight gets replaced by like systems like Codex and the automation systems like that OpenAI have. Is that a proper analogy to use as far as how aggressive they can, these companies are essentially cannibalizing?
the Amazon analogy undersells it. The reality is that these, OpenAI intends to own all these spaces and domains. Um, Anthropic intends to own all these space and domain. Google intends to own it. So, I mean, all these early plays that were dependent upon those models and those models and platforms, you're never going to compete paying retail for their compute. And as you watch Codex and Claude Code just displace whole categories of solutions, you're seeing right now with the agent capabilities that OpenAI has added and that Anthropic have added built in, and Google's just announced all these agents, that these are monolithic platforms at the end of the day. Now, you can leverage that for your business needs of doing that. But if someone was telling me what they're doing 3 years ago, hey, I'm going to go build this coding product that works for it. If you look at what's happened to Cursor, if you look at what's happened in these other plays that, the musical chairs has taken place. There were some acquisitions they did to acquire that. But if you want to know where this is happening, watch what Anthropic is doing in the legal space. That there were all these legal solutions for that they're selling directly to attorneys now. OpenAI is doing the same thing, these large marketing organizations, and everything from brand books going to the platform. These are monolithic platforms. And yes, you can integrate, yes, you can leverage it. Certainly for a business, you're making shoes, what doesn't matter? You're not building product. But if you're building a software product relying on one of those LLMs, if it is a worthwhile space, they will go into it and do it in a manner which you can't possibly compete. And that's something to be very careful about. And we had this is a model we've seen before. We saw it back when IBM and Digital had all these mainframes, and there were a couple other ancillary players, but you bought your accounting software from IBM, you bought everything from that we're seeing those models there. That's what they're intending to capture. So, if you're launching a new SaaS solution and your SaaS solutions depend on those models and it's something that's on their radar, like coding was an easy one to see. There are others that are less intuitive now, and you see all these marketing tools. Google has a whole Gemini-based marketing suite, which basically is designed to put your little local marketeer out of business. That's something just to be very mindful, I think, in the space. But the Amazon basics, where it's like, hey, it's okay thing, it would be as if, okay, that you did that and then Amazon launched a superior product derived from your product.
So
It's, yeah.
here's a question then. If you're a SaaS company, or say you're a frontier model company, say you're, OpenAI or
Yeah.
Gemini or so it is there a case to be made when some of these go public with their IPOs? Now, people are estimating like, Anthropic could be a $40 trillion company. I know that they're going to spend so much, almost all of that money on future proofing their compute and things like this. Is there a case to be made that if you're a $40 trillion company, that you could go out and buy a Salesforce, you could buy Adobe, incorporate them so that you're buying the name and the trust that has been built up over the years with those SaaS models incorporated? Because say you're Gemini, are you going to use Nano Banana or are you going to use Adobe? You know what I mean? Can you imagine if Adobe was like part of their suite and folded into that? You'd almost be buying the name, but you'd be buying the institutional knowledge and things like that to make those offerings, better. Is there a case to be made that you're going to start seeing this? Because also, if the per seat model is collapsing and you're trying to, substitute it with credits or things like this, I can imagine there are some SaaS who are like, you know what, I don't want to take the risk that there's going to be a chair for me when the music stops. I want to be bought out by a company that has a bunch of money where we can live, you know what I mean, and use all that stuff. I mean, is there a model for that?
I think that's already happening, Jesse.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Those conversations are happening now. And that to control that. I wrestle with this whole like 40 trillion, whatever, and we say the SpaceX. There is a finite population on the planet right now. It's not really growing very tremendously. Are you going to extract, that kind of value out of every human being on the planet? I think we're reaching the limits of what you can call it. There's always a TAM, but there's also, a SOM and a SAM, what you actually can get. But I do think you're seeing those conversations happen. That there is going to be, and like any other kind of M&A, there's going to be musical chairs where, all right, all three of the major players already got one of those. Adobe, brands like Adobe that have such a following tie in. I think you're hearing rumblings of that already because they basically have enough capital to buy anybody.
Yeah.
I mean, there's no company too big in this space. So
what's the first company to fall? What's the first major company to get bought, you think?
Disney.
Disney. IP, yeah.
IP. You have the IP in the catalog. They are, with ESPN out of that. We're not a financial investment podcast.
Yeah, no,
This
no,
is
not at
just
all.
in terms of the what is happening in
We do not own
industry.
stakes in any of these.
But there's a lot of IP that they have. You have a basic cable marketplace that went away. ESPN was propping up Disney for years in terms of revenue. Disney is trying to get into everything, including real estate and housing development. They are everywhere. That it could be IP because that's data on IP. And if you had that data pieces and doing that, that's valuable. And I think the media company investment, it's no coincidence that there's overlap between Oracle and the media properties that Larry's son's buying. This is not coincidental. That is IP. Those are things that become hugely valuable.
And I'm going to put out a guess. My guess is, and I don't own stock, does not financial or anything like that, but I would think a company like Epic would be, because the pressure on it, first of all, there's such a move into healthcare, and the pressure on them, I imagine something like Epic might be talked about, because people try to replicate that and they haven't been able to. This would be a way to do that.
This is, and actually, the ability to pull those things in. I think everything is on the table.
Yeah.
And we talk about the Epic that, and heck, Gary and I, when we were in North Carolina last week, we were talking about Epic Games. All of these, everything here is on the table and plan changes. But that wasn't conceivable, a few years ago, that you had these companies that be so monstrously huge that they could acquire all of that.
Yeah. But thinking about Epic though, Jesse, I think you're I mean, if I were to like bet on it, I would definitely have to say somebody in the digital healthcare space, because when you look at it, for any like company like OpenAI to replicate for something like that, yeah, they can all day replicate processes and interfaces and technology pieces, right? But the hardest part about building Epic are all the trust vectors and all the workflows built for it to work in the entire health system. You know what I mean? Like, so there's so much compliance that goes into that. There's so much there was a lot of human work that went into establishing the SOPs, the best practices, the systems. It wasn't because it's a cool technology piece. It was a lot of orchestration between your business police and the technical team.
And it's so Byzantine, so Byzantine that, the relationship with health insurance, the hospital systems. I mean, yeah.
And the patient populations there, because I'd like to note the past 3 weeks, I've heard 4 pitches from 4 separate companies using AI for peptide discovery.
Yeah, that's a big one.
Basically, that you have, there's a whole other world. Like, that's basically why we could have a whole other podcast on just how that universe is shaking out. And, back to your original point, Gary, I think that basically nothing's off the table for these companies. We just talked about the most, important EHR, EMR platform and Star Wars and Disney. All other, it's the scope here is without prior precedent.
Yeah. Yeah. Hey, we're just thinking about this for a minute here, not to try to change the topic, but you had mentioned something about how much is changing as far as like the total addressable market relative for just even tech companies, right? For lack of a better word, called even like SaaS companies, right? AI has completely changed the TAM for SaaS companies, because software is no longer limited to software budgets. It can now go after labor budgets. Because historically that's all it was. SaaS companies sold into IT or a department software budget, but now, it's entirely different now. The buyer's no longer asking, is this software worth $100 a seat? They're asking if they can replace, compress, or even augment $500,000 of labor. So that's very.
Yeah, I think the frontier model is already demonstrating that. But I think the challenge for Salesforce is, if I lay off 10,000 people from my company and 8,000 of them had Salesforce seats, that I'm not going to be buying 8,000 headless AI seats, and that efficiency that we have. And that's the real trick, is that that lack of predictability is why you're seeing the values of SaaS companies take such a hit. Because yeah, I think there will be pickups in the mix like that. There will be labor substitution, labor budget pickups. But given the opportunity, just the Cloudflare CEO, that letter was very blunt. They've made more money than ever made, and they're reducing their headcount by 20% was the number. Yeah, just more. They made more money than ever made, and they want to make even more money by eliminating that.
Yeah, and by the way, anybody, I'm a pessimist on this. Anyone who believes that, like, we're going to, the companies will find, ways to get more out of the people that they have. They also, answer to their stockholders. And a stockholder, all they want to see is you're using AI. Well, if you're using AI, why do you have so many people? That
Yeah,
is the
yeah.
equation. And so they have to dump people. It's not this, hey, well, they have AI, so we're just everybody's gonna be able to do more. None of this. It's the equation is you have AI, why do you have so many people? That is the simple way that an investor is going to pressure a company, and you're gonna see it. I mean, the opposite of that is I was talking earlier about the infinite backlog, and I said to Det one time that AI has allowed me, I had all this list of things that I wanted to do in my life that I never thought I would get to, or I wasn't smart enough, or whatever. I am looking at that list and I'm picking things out of it that I never thought I would do in my life. And businesses are the same way because
Yeah.
I think in the short term, a lot of smart businesses might actually hire people because what's happened is all these things in the infinite backlog that I never thought we would be able to do. Well, now we're suddenly able to do them. And now I need people to be able to do that. Once you work through the infinite backlog, that may be a different story. But I think that you're going to see a case where some people are going to hire more people because they have a vision for things that they never thought that they were going to be able to do before. And they need people to implement that. And in the short term, I think you might see that. But the more X and O kind or 1 and 0 kind of business is going to be like, well, AI is doing that. I don't need that person. They're gone.
I think there's much to be said that we actually, as Americans, and this is an American podcast for anyone who's listening outside the country, but as Americans, we've been noted to have the most negative view about AI. Everyone else sees it this great uplifting thing and doing that. Americans are incredibly negative. Like we're number one in being negative about AI.
Yeah.
And I think part of that is that relationship that America has with corporate behavior that we're here. I'm here in Pennsylvania. Jesse's here in Pennsylvania. There are the steel towns, the coal towns, and things don't exist that these companies, given the option to serve those shareholders, there's a long history in this country of worker displacement there. And traditionally, it's been displacement of workers or largely blue collar. Now you see some of those warning signs in the white collar workforce being treated the same way, that the American hostility towards AI, not from our crew here, but the hostility that exists out there is that they know when many companies are making that decision, they can go down either road. They're picking that road that is traditionally not favored the people working at the company. And the smart players will leverage that this is the right time to grow maybe different kinds of talent. Maybe I don't need as many folks in app dev, but I need more finance and operations people that can leverage AI. I think there will be an evolution of that, but the hostility I think the average American has towards AI and his protests about data centers, all these things are tied to a long history of the American people dealing with corporate self-governance in these areas.
And it's not unfounded, that I mean, you're seeing, commencement speakers getting booed because they mention AI. It's tough for us, I think, because we have this something that strikes at the very heart of who we are as human beings. Our ability to be productive and contribute to society feels like it's in the hands of people who are the least human people we've ever seen. I mean, we look at, like, the Musks and the Altmans, they don't even seem like they're real people. Or you're
Yeah.
listening to Jeff Bezos the other day, the interview, and if you're a normal person and you're watching this, it has to feel disheartening because you're getting this new technology is coming in that you're unsure of. But the worst part is it's in control of people who do not seem to fundamentally understand what your fears about it are. And the answer always seems to be, just trust us. You know what I mean? It'll work out. You know what I mean? It'll work out for you. You're a multi-billionaire. You know what I mean? But if you're living paycheck to paycheck and you're paying X amount for gas or groceries, or you're not sure if your job is safe, those are really real concerns. And so I think that people generally, the mistrust is not, well, they just don't understand. The mistrust is real, and I think it's warranted for a lot of people, because these AI, the people who run it and who are pushing it so hard, and I get it. We're in this business too. They just cannot seem to be able to communicate why the bad stuff won't happen and the good stuff will. I mean,
Yeah.
the closest I've seen, it's an amazing letter, and it got totally glossed over. Sam Altman wrote this letter to people. Did you guys see it? It
Yep.
was a couple weeks ago. And the line that stood out to me is, "We love you and we want the best for you." And it was just such an anomaly of a line. I've never heard. Now, did AI write it? Or did somebody in his marketing team write it? But it was so weird to see that line expressed like that. Like it almost touched me, because now, do I believe it? I don't know. But it was a very different type of message than I think we've seen from people like.
I think that was a sincere message. I mean,
It did
part
seem,
of
it
that
felt
is
sincere.
that
Yeah.
you also see the same from Anthropic's CEO. I mean,
Yes.
there's a
Dario.
recognition.
Yeah.
It's not just about, hey, I won't be able to be uber rich if something goes awry here. I think it's an understanding where, the amount of change, I know we're come to time here, but the amount of change that we're asking people to absorb, and we talked about this in prior podcast episodes, folks want to listen to those, but we're asking people to absorb a lot of change so quickly that even in what you look at what was announced this week, in that people really aren't great at that. And when that change includes disrupting what your job is, how you're getting paid and doing that, you're going to have negative reactions. You're going to have people who are reacting negatively to that. And I think it's that work is not over. And there's probably big pain aspects of that are still very much on deck. And we're going to see a lot of objectionable corporate behavior, and we're going to see a lot of innovation in the coming months. But we are right in the thick of it right now.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. We covered some great stuff, guys. This has been one of our lengthiest sessions. Well, it's good to hear that SaaS is not going away, but yeah, we. I mean, we all knew that. Really, it's just like anything. You have any major technical shift or any major shift, it's just going to force all right now. It's just forcing all of us technology companies to be way more competitive, which is an awesome problem to have to create more
Indeed.
value. Yeah. Well, great stuff, guys. Anything else that we missed? You guys want to cover? Or
I think we need to have our little closing thoughts, or can't let it go, whatever you want to call it, at the end of the podcast. What is it, Gary, that you can't let go from this past week? Positive, negative, journey?
well, not from this week, but I don't know why. You said something earlier in one of the I think maybe like towards the beginning of the podcast or something. But I don't know why it's been sticking with me since. But it reminded me of a line that Sam Altman said during one of the interviews. I think he was like arguing with a media reporter about like the resources it takes to train an AI system, like an LLM, amount of water usage, the computation, the energy. And then he like rebuts back and starts arguing like, look how much work it takes for us to like raise a human. They're born, the amount of food they got to eat, the amount of time, this and that. Like it felt kind of like scary that he was like anti-human as far as his response. But I don't know why that's been kind of like ringing in my head.
Well, yeah, it's a thing. Jesse?
I heard yesterday that there is a chance that Anthropic might actually break even or even have a profit in Q3. And growing up in an era where startups don't make money for years and years and years, especially with the amount of money people are putting to compute, that really, really shocked me that some of these companies are close to actually being profitable this early on. I have to dive more into that, but the idea that, a AI company could start to be profitable this early, even before their IPO, is pretty amazing to me.
There's real economics behind all that money being spent. There's no doubt.
Yeah.
I mean, for me, I think with Google I/O week, with all the announcements that Google made and the various counter announcements that the other frontier models and folks made, I will spend the Memorial Day weekend here, which is, we recorded this right before Memorial Day weekend. I will spend the weekend soaking in all that's transpired. And we keep a steady stream, the Futurmatic family here, a steady stream of all the news and articles and things. And it's a lot. And it's going to be a rainy day weekend in Northeast, not much else to do, to consume and just sit and soak in all of that, because the rate of change here, by the time we record the next episode of this podcast, it's going to be remarkable how much more change moved on. And certainly appreciate the folks listening and everyone's time today.
It is funny that, real quickly though, out of all that Google stuff, the thing that came to mind after I saw all the different offerings and the different things that they were offering is Google's going to Google. It's so funny. All these different things that may or may not be here in 6 months, and some of them are amazing and some of this, but there's always like, why did they do that? Why is that separate? Like, there's so many questions, and it's the most forward-thinking things Google's ever done. And at the same time, it's the most Google thing Google's ever done as well. So it's Google's going to Google no matter what.
And we can let everyone engage on that on our Google Wave account. The many things they abandoned along the way, and the newsreader.
Yes.
But yeah, no, we, Futurmatic team, really appreciate it.
I'm going to put this in Bard afterwards.
Great. Yeah. Awesome. Thanks, guys.
Always a pleasure, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.
Thank you.